The Valoran science vessel, ascending light, floated dead in the cold darkness of the Tanix Nebula. Its engines had failed 3 days ago when the antimatter containment field collapsed without warning. Now, the ship drifted like a leaf on a river, carried by gravitational currents, deeper and deeper into one of the most dangerous regions of known space. Commander Zilith stood on the bridge and watched the emergency lights flicker. His scaled skin, normally a bright blue color, had faded to a dull gray from stress and exhaustion. Around him, his crew worked at their stations with quiet desperation, trying to keep the ship alive for just a few more hours. Life support efficiency has dropped to 43%, reported Engineer Corax, his voice tired. We have maybe 20 cycles before the air becomes unbreathable. Zilith closed his 4 eyes and let out a long breath. 20 cycles. Less than 2 standard days? That was all the time his 42 crew members had left to live unless someone found them. The problem was that no one knew where they were. The Tanix Nebula was a swirling cloud of radiation and exotic particles that blocked most communication signals. Their distress beacon had been broadcasting for days, but the chances of anyone receiving it were very small. Have we received any response to our signal? Zilith asked, already knowing the answer. Navigator Orvek shook his head slowly. Nothing, Commander. The nebula interference is too strong. Even if someone heard us, they would have great difficulty finding our exact location. Science Officer Thrin looked up from her console. She was young for her position, barely past her 2nd century, but her mind was sharp. Commander, I have been thinking about our situation. There is one option we have not considered. Speak, Zilith said. Thrin hesitated. The humans. Their communication technology operates on different frequencies than ours. They use a primitive but powerful system that might penetrate the nebula interference better than our standard channels. Ow. The bridge fell silent. Every Valoran present knew about the humans. They were a young species, barely 300 years into space travel, who had appeared on the galactic stage like a sudden storm. The Galactic Council, which represented over 100 civilized species, had watched their rapid expansion with growing concern. Humans were different from other species in ways that made the Council uncomfortable. They were aggressive, unpredictable, and seemed to have an unusual tolerance for violence. Their history was filled with wars fought against each other, something most species found horrifying and primitive. The Council had voted to limit contact with them and had rejected their application for membership 3 times. We cannot contact the humans, said Medical Officer Yalith firmly. The Council has forbidden direct communication with their species. They are considered dangerous and unstable. Council is not here, Thrin replied quietly. And we will all be dead in 20 cycles. Zilith looked around at his crew. He saw fear in their eyes, but also hope. Thrin had given them something they had lost a chance, however small. What do we actually know about humans? He asked. Not the Council reports. What do we know from direct observation? Orvex pulled up files on his console. They are a relatively small species, bipedal, with limited natural defenses. No claws, no scales, no venom. Their bodies are soft and fragile compared to most spacefaring races. They require constant temperature regulation and cannot survive in vacuum for more than a few minutes. That does not sound very dangerous, commented Corax. Their danger is not physical, Thrin explained. It is psychological. Humans have an unusual ability to continue functioning under extreme stress. They will fight even when the situation is hopeless. They form strong emotional bonds with each other and will take irrational risks to protect members of their group. The Council considers this behavior unpredictable and therefore threatening. Zilith considered this information. Have humans ever attacked a vessel in distress? Have they ever harmed civilians or non-combatants? The crew exchanged glances. No one could think of such an incident. There are actually several recorded cases of humans providing assistance to other species, Thrin admitted. They pulled survivors from a Keth cargo ship that had been attacked by pirates. They provided medical supplies to a Luminari colony during a plague outbreak. In each case, they asked for nothing in return. Then why does the Council fear them so much? Yalith asked. Because we do not understand them, Zilith said slowly, a realization forming in his mind. We fear what we cannot predict. Humans do not behave according to logical self-interest. They help strangers for no clear benefit. They fight impossible battles. They sacrifice themselves for ideas and emotions. This makes them impossible to control or manipulate, and that frightens the council. He made his decision. Thrin, prepare a distress signal on human frequencies. Include our exact coordinates, the nature of our emergency, and the number of souls aboard. Commander Yaleth protested. If we survive this, the council will. If we survive this, I will face the council's judgment gladly, Xyleth interrupted. But I will not let my crew die because of political fear. Send the signal. Thrin worked quickly, her fingers moving across her console. The human communication system was crude but powerful, broadcasting on a wide range of frequencies with simple encoding. Within minutes, the signal was ready. Transmission prepared, Commander. Should I send it? Xyleth looked once more at his crew. 42 lives hung in the balance. 42 families waiting at home. 42 futures that would end in this cold nebula unless someone answered their call. Send it.
What are the levels?
Pushing through the nebula's interference with surprising strength, it carried a simple message. A ship in distress, coordinates, crew count, and a request for help from anyone who could hear. For long hours, nothing happened. The crew returned to their tasks, trying to stretch their remaining resources as far as possible. Xyleth sat in his command chair and watched the communication console, waiting for a response that might never come. Then, just as hope was beginning to fade, a light blinked on Thrin's station. "Commander," she said, her voice shaking, "we have a response. Human vessel constellation. They are asking for confirmation of our position." The bridge erupted in surprised chatter. Xyleth held up his hand for silence. "Confirm our position and ask them how soon they can reach us." Thrin sent the message and waited. The response came back quickly. They say they can reach us in approximately 12 hours. They are already changing course. She looked up at Xyleth with an expression of disbelief. "Commander, they are coming. They are actually coming." Xyleth felt something he had not expected, not relief, but a strange new fear. The humans were coming. The species that the entire Galactic Council feared. The unpredictable, emotional, violent humans. They were coming to help. And somehow, that was more terrifying than the thought of dying alone in the Time-It. Nebula, the human patrol vessel constellation, was completing a routine. Sweep of the outer territories when communications. Officer Katie Morgan noticed something unusual on her console. She was a young woman with short red hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her shift was nearly over. She had been looking forward to a hot meal and some sleep, but the signal on her screen changed everything. "That is strange," she muttered to herself, adjusting the frequency filters. The signal was weak and distorted, clearly coming from deep within the Tanix Nebula, but the message was unmistakable. A ship in distress. Coordinates. 42 crew members. A plea for help. She checked the linguistic markers and felt her eyebrows rise. The signal was Valoran in origin. Katie reached for the intercom. "Captain Grant to the bridge, please." "We have a situation." Captain Daniel Grant arrived 4 minutes later, still carrying the cup of coffee he had been drinking in the mess hall. He was a man in his mid-50s, with a weathered face and calm gray eyes. 25 years in space had taught him to never rush to judgment, but also to never hesitate when action was needed. "Report, Morgan," he said, settling into the captain's chair.
Aye.
Distress signal, sir. Valoran's science vessel, stranded in the Tanix Nebula with failing life support. 42 souls aboard. They estimate they have less than 20 hours before their air runs out. First Officer Marcus Webb had followed the captain onto the bridge. He was a tall man with dark skin and a thoughtful expression. He immediately began pulling up navigational charts on the main display. The Tanix Nebula is bad news, Captain, he said. Radiation storms, gravitational anomalies, sensor interference. It would be a dangerous trip even under ideal conditions.
How long to reach them?
If we push our engines to maximum, maybe 10 to 12 hours, but we would be taking significant risks with the ship and crew. Grant nodded slowly, studying the star chart. What about other vessels in the area? Anyone closer? Katie checked her readings. Negative, sir. We appear to be the only ship within response range. The nebula blocks most communication, so the signal probably did not reach anyone else. It's interesting that we received it at all, Webb observed. Valorans normally use Council standard frequencies. This was broadcast on our frequencies specifically. They called us deliberately, Grant said. It was not a question. It would seem so, sir. The captain was quiet for a moment, thinking. Every officer on the bridge knew the political situation. The Valorans were founding members of the Galactic Council and had been among the loudest voices calling for restrictions on human expansion. They had voted against human membership applications multiple times and had publicly called humanity a dangerous and unstable species. By all logic, the Valorans were not friends of humanity. Some might even call them enemies. Webb, Grant said finally, what is our duty under interstellar maritime law regarding distress signals? The first officer did not need to check the regulations. Any vessel receiving a legitimate distress signal is obligated to render assistance. If doing so would not pose unreasonable danger to their own crew. However, there are exceptions for vessels from non-allied species. And the Council has designated humans as non-participants in the treaty system. So legally, we have no obligation to help them, correct, sir? We could ignore the signal, and no law would hold us accountable. Grant took a long drink of his coffee. Morgan, open a channel to the Valoran vessel. Caddy worked her console quickly. Channel open, sir. Audio and visual. The main screen flickered, and then a Valoran face appeared. Commander Xyleth looked tired and worried, his scales dull under the emergency lighting. His four eyes widened slightly when he saw the human bridge crew. This is Captain Daniel Grant of the Earth vessel Constellation. We have received your distress signal. Please confirm your situation. Xyleth recovered quickly from his surprise. Captain Grant, I am Commander Xyleth of the Ascending Light. Our ship has suffered a catastrophic engine failure. We are drifting in the Tanix Nebula with failing life support systems. We have 42 crew members aboard and estimate we have approximately 18 hours before conditions become fatal. Understood, Commander. We are approximately 12 hours from your position at maximum speed. Can you hold out that long? There was a pause. Xyleth exchanged glances with someone off-screen before responding. We can, Captain. But I must ask you, are certain you wish to attempt this rescue? The nebula is extremely dangerous, and your species has no obligation to help us. Grant leaned forward slightly in his chair. Commander, when someone calls for help, we answer. That is how we do things. Your coordinates have been locked in, and we are on our way. Constellation out. He signaled Katie to close the channel, then turned to his crew. All hands, this is the captain. We have received a distress signal from a Valoran vessel stranded in the Tanix Nebula. We are moving to assist. All departments prepare for emergency rescue operations and potential radiation exposure. This will not be an easy trip, but there are 42 lives depending on us. Let us show them what humans can do. What? He looked at the helm officer, a young man named Henry Price, who had been with the Constellation for only 2 years, but had already proven himself in difficult situations. Mr. Price, set course for the Tanix Nebula. Maximum sustainable speed. Captain. Course laid in. Execute. The stars on the view screen began to move, as the constellation changed course. Within minutes, the ship was accelerating toward the dangerous nebula. Leaving the safety of charted space behind, Webb stepped closer to the captain and spoke quietly. "Sir, you know there will be questions about this decision. The Valorans have been actively working against us in the Council. Some will say we should have let them handle their own problems." Grant kept his eyes on the view screen. "Those people can say whatever they want after we bring those 42 Valorans home alive. Until then, we have work to do." He stood up and headed for the door. "I will be in engineering. We need every bit of speed we can get. You have the bridge, Webb." As the captain left, Katie Morgan looked at the first officer. "Sir, do you think the Valorans will change their opinion of us after this?" Webb considered the question. "Honestly, Morgan, I do not know. But that is not why we are doing this. We are doing it because it is the right thing to do. What happens after is not our concern." The constellation pushed deeper into the darkness, racing against time to save strangers who had called humanity their enemy. Behind them, the safe lights of civilized space grew smaller. Ahead, the swirling clouds of the Tanix Nebula waited like the mouth of a hungry beast. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos, 42 Valorans waited for help they had never expected to receive. From a species they had never expected to come, the Tanix Nebula was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. Swirling clouds of purple and orange gas stretched across millions of kilometers, lit from within by the radiation of dying stars. It looked like a painting made by some cosmic artist. But every crew member on the constellation knew that beauty was deadly. Chief Engineer Patricia Cole stood in the engine room, watching her instruments with the focus of a doctor monitoring a critical patient. The ship's shields were absorbing enormous amounts of radiation, and the whole temperature was climbing steadily. She had already rerouted power from non-essential systems to strengthen the protective barriers. But she knew they were pushing the limits of what the ship could handle. "Engine efficiency at 87%, she reported over the intercom. "Shield integrity holding at 62%. We are getting hit hard, but we can take it." On the bridge, Captain Grant acknowledged the report with a nod. He stood behind the helm station, watching Henry Price navigate through the swirling chaos with careful precision. The young officer's hands moved constantly, making small adjustments to keep the ship stable in the unpredictable currents. "Gravitational anomaly ahead," Price announced, compensating. The ship shuddered as it passed through a pocket of twisted space. Several crew members grabbed handholds to keep their balance. Grant remained standing, his legs absorbing the motion with practiced ease. "Contact established with the Valoran vessel," Katie Morgan reported. "They are tracking our approach. Commander Xyleth is requesting to speak with you, sir." "Put him through." The view screen split to show both the swirling nebula ahead and the face of the Valoran commander. Xyleth looked even more exhausted than before, but there was something new in his expressions, something that might have been hope. "To Captain Grant, I must admit I did not believe you would actually come. The nebula conditions are severe. You are putting your crew at significant risk." "Commander, my crew knows what they signed up for." "How is your situation?" "Stable for now. We have managed to extend our life support by another 4 hours by shutting down all non-essential systems. Several crew members are showing early signs of oxygen deprivation, but nothing critical yet." Grant studied the Valoran's face. "Commander, I have to ask why. Did you call us?" "The Valorans have been opposed to humanity for decades. Your council has called us dangerous and unstable. Why reach out to us?" Xyleth was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy. "Because we were dying, Captain. Because every other option had failed. And because, despite everything my government has said about your species, I had heard stories. Stories about humans who helped strangers without asking for anything in return. Stories that made no logical sense." He paused. "I decided to test whether those stories were true. What is your conclusion so far?" "I am beginning to think that we may have made serious errors in our assessment of your species." Grant allowed himself a small smile. "We will continue this conversation after we get you out of there." Constellation out. The next 3 hours were the hardest of the journey. The constellation passed through a region of intense radiation storms that nearly overwhelmed the shields. Warning alarms blared constantly as systems reported damage and overload conditions. In the medical bay, Dr. Samuel Bennett treated 4 crew members for radiation burns despite their protective suits. Ensign Lucy Howard, assigned to the sensor station, earned herself a commendation when she detected a massive gravitational eddy moments before it would have caught the ship. Her warning gave Price just enough time to change course and avoid being pulled into a region of space where the laws of physics became unpredictable. "Good eyes, Ensign," Grant told her. "You probably just saved all our lives." Howard's face was pale but determined. "Thank you, sir. Just doing my job." In engineering, Patricia Cole performed minor miracles. When the primary shield generator began to overheat, she jury-rigged a cooling system using parts from a broken food processor. When a power coupling failed, she bypassed it so quickly that the ship barely lost speed. Her team worked alongside her without complaint, pushing themselves to the limit. "How are you holding together down there?" Webb asked over the intercom. "With spit, prayers, and creative engineering," Cole replied, "but we will get there. Do not worry about us." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sensors detected the ascending light. The Valoran vessel appeared on the view screen, and the sight made several crew members gasp. The ship was in terrible condition. Scorch marks covered the hull where fires had burned. Several sections had been torn open by micrometeorites, exposing empty compartments to space. Emergency lights flickered through the remaining windows, showing just how desperate the situation had become. "She is barely holding together," Price said quietly. "Then we arrived just in time," Grant replied. "Morgan, hail them." Commander Xylith's face appeared on screen. Behind him, the Valoran bridge was filled with smoke and the orange glow of warning lights. "Captain Grant, you made it." "We had begun to lose hope." "We are here now, Commander. What is your current status?" 17 crew members injured, 3 critically. Life support will fail completely within 4 hours. Our hull is compromised in multiple sections, and we have lost control of several compartments. "Can your crew be moved to our ship?" Xylith hesitated. "Our docking systems are incompatible with yours. We cannot establish a direct connection." Grant had expected this problem. "Then we will do it the hard way. We will bring our ship alongside yours and transfer your crew through space in environmental suits." The Valoran commander's eyes widened. "Captain, that would require your people to perform multiple spacewalks in nebula conditions. The radiation exposure alone could be fatal. We have protection suits rated for these conditions. It will not be comfortable, but it is possible." Grant turned to his first officer. "Webb, start organizing rescue teams. I want every available crew member ready to go." "Aye, Captain." Grant looked back at the view screen. "Commander Xylith, start moving your crew to your airlock sections. Prioritize the injured and anyone with medical training. We will begin transfer operations in 30 minutes, Captain Grant." Scylla struggled to find words. "Why are you doing this? The risk to your crew is enormous. You owe us nothing. Your people could die trying to save us," Grant answered simply. "Commander, in about 30 minutes, your crew will not be Valorans, and my crew will not be humans. They will just be people helping other people. That is all that matters. Close the channel and began issuing orders." The rescue operation was about to begin, and there was no room for doubt or hesitation. 42 lives hung in the balance. The crew of the Constellation was ready to risk everything to save them. The nebula continued to rage around them, caring and merciless. But inside the small human ship, preparations moved forward with determined efficiency. They had come too far to fail now. Lieutenant Christopher Hayes floated in the void between the two ships, tethered to the Constellation by a thin cable that seemed impossibly fragile against the vast emptiness around him. His environmental suit was already showing yellow warning lights for radiation exposure, and he had been outside for less than 10 minutes. Ahead of him, the airlock of the ascending light waited like a dark mouth. Behind him, the lights of his home ship provided a small comfort in the overwhelming darkness. All around him, the nebula swirled and pulsed with deadly energy. "First team approaching Valoran airlock," he reported through his helmet radio. "Beginning entry procedure." His team consisted of 4 other crew members, each one a volunteer who had known exactly what they were signing up for. They had trained for rescue operations in hostile environments, but nothing could fully prepare a person for the reality of floating through a radioactive nebula to save aliens who had spent decades calling humanity dangerous. The Valoran airlock was damaged but functional. Hayes worked the manual controls while his team secured themselves around the opening. The door slid open slowly, revealing a dark corridor filled with smoke and the smell of burned electronics. "We're inside," Hayes reported. Moving to locate survivors, they found the first group of Valorans in what appeared to be a cargo bay that had been converted into an emergency shelter. About 15 aliens huddled together in the dim light, their scales dulled and their movements sluggish from the thin air. When they saw the human team enter, their reactions ranged from relief to visible fear. "Do not be afraid," Hayes said, hoping his translator was working properly. "We are here to help." "Can everyone walk?" A young Valoran female stepped forward. Her scales were a deep green, cracked and damaged from the stress of the past days. "Most of us can move on our own. There are 4 who cannot. They are injured." Hayes looked at the injured Valorans. 2 had broken limbs, 1 had severe burns across her body, and 1 seemed to be barely conscious. Moving them through space would be extremely difficult and dangerous. "Okay, here's what we are going to do. Those who can walk will put on these emergency suits." He distributed the equipment his team had brought. "My people will guide you across to our ship. The injured will need to be carried." The evacuation began. One by one, the Valorans were fitted with human emergency suits that had been hastily modified to accommodate their different body shapes. The suits were uncomfortable and did not fit well, but they would keep their wearers alive long enough to cross the gap between ships. Back on the Constellation, Dr. Samuel Bennett had transformed the medical bay into something resembling a small hospital. He had studied everything available about Valoran biology during the journey, but theory was very different from practice. When the first injured aliens arrived, he had to rely on instinct as much as knowledge. Their blood is copper-based instead of iron-based. He muttered to Nurse Amanda Fisher as they worked on a Valoran with internal injuries. "But the basic principles are the same. We stop the bleeding, reduce swelling, maintain oxygen flow." Fisher moved with calm efficiency, handing instruments and adjusting equipment without needing to be asked. She had volunteered for this mission without hesitation, even though her own radiation exposure was climbing with every passing minute. "How are you doing?" Bennett asked her quietly. "I will worry about myself later," she replied. "Right now, we have patience." On the damaged Valoran ship, the rescue teams had split up to search different sections. The conditions were getting worse by the minute. Air was leaking from dozens of small holes in the hull. Fires burned in compartments that could no longer be reached. The sound of the ship dying filled every corridor with groans and creaks of failing metal. "Lieutenant." Hayes found Commander Zeleth on what remained of the bridge. The Valoran commander was helping his injured crew members prepare for evacuation while simultaneously trying to keep the ship's remaining systems functioning. "You need to come with us now," Hayes said. "The ship will not last much longer." Zeleth shook his head. "I must be the last to leave. It is our tradition. The captain does not abandon the vessel until every crew member is safe." Hayes understood. Human captains had the same tradition. "Then let us work faster." They worked side by side for the next 2 hours, human and Valoran together, united by the simple goal of saving lives. Language barriers meant nothing when the task was clear. Cultural differences vanished when there was a wounded person who needed to be carried to safety. On her 6th trip between ships, Ensign Lucy Howard began showing serious symptoms of radiation sickness. She vomited inside her helmet and nearly lost consciousness during the crossing. When she reached the Constellation's airlock, crew members had to pull her inside and rush her to medical. "Howard is down," Webb reported to Captain Grant. "Bennett says she will recover, but she cannot go back out." Grant's jaw tightened. They had already lost 3 rescue team members to radiation exposure, and the evacuation was not yet complete. "How many Valorans remain on the ship?" 8, including Commander Zeleth. "I am going across." "With respect, you cannot. I am not asking for permission." Webb, I am informing you. Grant grabbed an environmental suit from the rack near the airlock. You have the ship. Keep her steady. The captain made the crossing himself, pushing through radiation levels that made his suit alarms scream constantly. When he reached the Valoran ship, he found Hayes and 2 other crew members struggling to move an unconscious alien through a collapsed corridor. Captain, Hayes exclaimed, you should not be here. Neither should any of us, Grant replied. But here we are. Let us finish this. Together, they pulled the last survivors from the dying ship. Commander Xyleth was indeed the last to leave, stepping through the airlock only after he had personally confirmed that every other Valoran was safely away. It is done, the alien commander said quietly as they began the crossing to the constellation. Everyone is accounted for. They had just reached the human ship when the ascending light finally gave up its struggle. The reactor containment failed, and the vessel tore itself apart in a silent explosion of light and debris. Where a Valoran science ship had floated moments before, there was nothing but expanding gas and fragments. We barely made it, Hayes breathed. But we did make it, Grant said. And that is what matters. The constellation's airlock closed behind them, sealing out the deadly nebula. Captain Grant removed his helmet and took a deep breath of clean, filtered air. His radiation badge was solid red. He would need medical treatment, but he was alive. And so were all 42 Valorans. Commander Xyleth removed his borrowed human equipment and looked at Grant with an expression that combined exhaustion, gratitude, and something deeper, a fundamental shift in understanding. You came for us, the Valoran said. You risked your lives. Some of your crew are in medical bay because they were injured saving my people? Yes, Grant said simply. Why? I need to understand. Why did you do this? Grant thought about the question. He thought about the politics, the history, the decades of distrust between their species, and then he gave the only answer that mattered. Because someone needed help. Because we could help. That is all there is to it. He put a hand on the alien. Commanders shoulder a human gesture of comfort that somehow transcended their differences and led him toward the medical bay where both humans and Valorans were being treated side by side. The rescue was complete. Now it was time to heal. The constellation emerged from the Tanix Nebula 3 days after the rescue, battered but intact. Chief Engineer Patricia Cole had performed miracles keeping the ship functional, but the damage was extensive. Hull plates were warped from radiation exposure. 3 engine components had failed completely. The shield generator was running at barely 40% efficiency. But none of that mattered to the crew. What mattered was the 42 Valoran survivors who filled their cargo bays, corridors, and spare quarters. What mattered was that everyone, human and alien alike, had survived. The ship limped toward Valoran space at reduced speed. Word of the rescue had spread through subspace communication channels, traveling faster than any physical ship could move. By the time the constellation reached the border of Valoran territory, half the galaxy had heard the story of what the humans had done. Captain Grant received a communication from Valoran. Central Command requesting permission to escort his vessel to their nearest space station. He granted the request and soon found himself surrounded by 6 Valoran warships that formed a protective formation around his damaged vessel. This is unexpected, Webb commented, watching the alien ships on the view screen. I half expected them to demand we leave their space immediately. Things change, Grant replied. The space station was called Harmony's Rest, a massive structure that orbited a blue gas giant in the heart of the Valoran system. It was a hub for diplomatic activity, hosting representatives from dozens of species that belonged to the Galactic Council. News of the constellation's arrival had drawn an unusual crowd. The docking bay was filled with beings of all kinds, Valorans, Keth Luminari, and many others, all watching in silence as the battered human ship came to rest, and its crew began to emerge. Commander Xyleth was among the first to disembark. He was immediately surrounded by Valoran officials who began asking questions and demanding reports. But the commander raised his hand for silence and turned to face the gathering crowd. Before anything else is said, he announced, his voice carrying across the bay, I wish to publicly acknowledge what the humans have done. The crowd fell quiet. Representatives who had been whispering among themselves stopped and listened. 3 days ago, my ship was dying in the Tanix Nebula. We sent a distress signal expecting nothing. We called for help from a species that our council has feared, restricted, and rejected for decades. Xyleth paused, letting the words sink in. The humans came anyway. He gestured toward the constellation, where Captain Grant and his crew were now emerging from the airlock. Several crew members were still showing visible signs of radiation sickness. Others walked with the exhausted steps of people who had pushed themselves far beyond normal limits. They flew through one of the most dangerous regions in known space. They risked their lives, their ship, and their health to save strangers who had given them every reason to let us die. Xyleth's voice grew stronger. They did not ask what benefit they would receive. They did not negotiate for political advantage. They simply came because someone needed help. A murmur ran through the crowd. Representatives exchanged glances, uncertain how to react to this unexpected testimony. I have served the Valoran people for 200 years, Xyleth continued. I have studied other species and learned to predict their behavior. But the humans, I cannot predict. They do not act according to the logic we understand. They help without expecting reward. They sacrifice for strangers. They refuse to let people die even when doing so would serve their interests. He turned to face the council representatives directly. We have called humanity dangerous, and we were right. But we were wrong about the nature of their danger. They are dangerous because they make us question everything we believe about how intelligent beings behave. They are dangerous because they show us that there is another way to exist, a way based on compassion rather than calculation. The crowd was completely silent now. In the history of the Galactic Council, no species had ever received such an endorsement from a former critic. I call upon the Council to reconsider its position on humanity, not because they have demanded it, not because they threaten us, but because we have been wrong, and it is time to have the courage to admit our mistake. Xyleth stepped back, his speech complete. For a long moment, no one moved or spoke. Then, slowly, something remarkable began to happen. A Keth representative stepped forward and made a gesture of respect toward Captain Grant, a gesture usually reserved for honored allies. A Luminar diplomat joined him, followed by others. One by one, representatives from species across the galaxy acknowledged the humans who had risked everything to save strangers. Captain Grant stood among his crew, uncomfortable with the attention. When the Council's chief administrator approached and asked if he wished to address the gathering, he hesitated. I am not much for speeches, he said finally. What we did was nothing special. Someone was in trouble. We could help. So we helped. He shrugged. That is just who we are. It is how we were raised. When you see someone drowning, you do not ask if they deserve to be saved. You just pull them out of the water. He looked around at the alien faces surrounding him, some familiar from the rescue, others strange and new. I do not know if this changes anything between our species. I do not know if the Council will vote differently because of what happened. But I do know that 42 people are alive today who would be dead if we had not answered that distress signal. And honestly, that is enough for me. The gathering began to break up slowly. Valoran medical teams moved in to transport survivors to better facilities. Human crew members were escorted to quarters where they could rest and receive treatment. Officials started the endless process of paperwork and reports that followed any significant incident, but something had shifted. The humans could feel it in the way other species looked at them, not with fear or suspicion, but with something approaching respect, maybe even wonder later, as the constellation prepared to depart for the long journey home. Commander Xyleth came to say goodbye. The Council will be debating your membership application again, he told Captain Grant. I cannot promise what the outcome will be. Old fears do not disappear overnight. Grant nodded. We understand. Change takes time. But I can promise you this, Xyleth continued. You will have at least one voice speaking in your favor. And I suspect, after today, you will have many more. He extended his hand, a human gesture he had learned from watching the crew during the past few days. Grant took it, and they shook hands. The first such gesture between their species. Safe travels, Captain. You as well. Commander. The constellation pulled away from Harmony's rest and set course for Earth. Behind them, the space station grew smaller until it disappeared among the stars. Katie Morgan looked at the view screen and smiled. Do you think they will actually change their minds about us? Captain Grant settled into his command chair. Maybe not. But that was never why we did it. Then why did we do it? Grant was quiet for a moment, looking out at the stars that stretched endlessly before them. 'Cause helping people is who we are. It is in our nature. And no matter what the rest of the galaxy thinks of us, that is something worth holding on to. The constellation accelerated into the darkness, carrying its tired but proud crew toward home. They had sent a message to the galaxy not in words, but in actions. And some messages echo far longer than anyone expects. A distress signal had been sent. What arrived had indeed alarmed the entire galaxy, but not in the way anyone had expected. Humanity had come, and nothing would ever be quite the same again.